You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, NeroWolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. If you've ever lived in a brownstone that has been standing on West 35th Street since men wore whiskers on purpose, you learn to recognize the sounds it makes when it's content. The radiators clank like old friends arguing, the stairs creak with mild complaint, the front door closes with the satisfied thud of security. That morning, it made a new sound. A quick, light click, then another, then a whole run of them, like a row of teeth snapping shut. I was at my desk in the office, trying to make a letter to a client sound as if we liked him, and Wolfe was in his chair behind his desk with his morning beer, his book, and his general conviction that the world should conduct itself quietly, in order not to disturb his digestion. Fritz had just withdrawn after delivering breakfast with the gravity of a man presenting evidence to a jury. The doorbell rang, not the polite, single ring of somebody with manners, but two sharp jabs, then a pause, then two more, as if the visitor were conducting Morse code for desperation. Wolfe's eyes lifted, half-lidded. "Mr. Goodwin." "I heard it," I said. "Unless you want me to ignore it and let whoever it is bleed artistically on the stoop." Wolfe grunted. Fritz, who had not yet reached the kitchen, reappeared as if summoned by the atmosphere. "Yes, sir." Wolfe waved a thick hand. "See who it is. If it is a salesman, send him away. If it is Inspector Kramer, tell him I am dead. If it is a corpse, leave it outside." Fritz's expression did not change. "Yes, sir." He went to the hall, and I heard the front door open. A gust of winter came in with the visitor. Sharp air, faint snow, and the city's smell of wet wool and exhaust. Then a voice came, strained and quick. "Please. I have to speak to him, please." Fritz said something low and calm, and then footsteps, fast, uneven, came toward the office. The man who entered looked as if the cold had tried to kill him and had been close. He was in his 40s, medium height, with a coat that had been expensive before it got wrinkled by panic. His hair was wet from sleet, and his eyes were the kind you see on people sprinting for a train that has already left. He stopped just inside the office doorway and stared at Wolfe as if Wolfe were a lighthouse. "NeroWolfe?" he said. Wolfe did not rise. "Wolfe seldom rises for presidents, and never for winter clients," he said. "Yes." The man's breath came fast. "My name is Grant Coyle. I'm Mr. Wolfe. I need your help. I need to stay here, in this house today." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "I do not run an inn." "I'm not asking for comfort," Coyle said, and his voice cracked on the word. "I'm asking for a shield." That got my attention. People usually come to Wolfe for answers, not armor. I stepped out from behind my desk and took a closer look at Grant Coyle. His coat cuffs were damp and frayed, as if he'd been grabbing at door frames. His knuckles had small abrasions. Fresh, red, he had the faint chemical smell of somebody who'd been in a lobby too long. And he kept glancing over his shoulder toward our hall, as if expecting a bullet to follow him indoors. Wolfe looked him over the way he looks over a menu. Not hungry, merely deciding what he despises. "Mr. Coyle," Wolfe said, "you are bringing danger to my home." "Yes," Coyle said quickly. "Yes, I am. But it's already on me, and if I leave, I'll be dead." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "That is a melodramatic assertion." Coyle swallowed. "It's a practical one," I said. "How do you know you'll be dead?" Coyle's gaze snapped to me. "Because someone tried to kill me an hour ago," Wolfe said. "Where?" "Outside my office building," Coyle replied. "Midtown, 2 men. One of them had a gun. They didn't care who saw. They missed because—" He stopped, and his face did something odd. Half shame, half awe, because I ran like a coward. Wolfe's expression remained unchanged. Cowardice is often useful. Coyle's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected approval from a man who disapproved of most breathing. "Mr. Wolfe, please, let me stay here, just until I can reach the police." or until you can. Mr. Coyle, Wolfe said, voice steady. I do not take cases that begin with an attempt to recruit my residence as a fortress. Coyle's breath hitched. Then I'm dead. Wolfe's lips compressed, possibly. That's Wolfe for you, he can make. Possibly sound like a slammed door. Coyle lurched forward a step, and Fritz appeared at the doorway behind him, calm but watchful, like a butler who has just realized the soup course may be interrupted by homicide. Coyle said, You don't understand. This isn't about money. It's about... He cut himself off and swallowed hard. It's about what I know. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. What you know is always about money. Knowledge has no other value. Coyle looked as if he might burst. All right, all right. Yes, money. But it's not mine. It's... God, I can't. He dragged a hand down his face, smearing damp sleet. I can't go anywhere else, they'll be waiting. Wolfe's gaze drifted briefly to the clock. He dislikes disruptions to schedule. Then he looked back at Coyle. If you are so certain, why have you not gone directly to the police? Coyle's laugh came out thin. Because the police are part of it, or someone inside them is. I don't know which, and that's why I'm here. Wolfe's eyes narrowed further, offended by the implication of complication. Inspector Kramer is crude, but not corrupt. I'm not talking about him, Coyle blurted. I'm talking about someone else, someone who can make things disappear. That was when the brownstone made its new sound again, only louder, click, click, click. It didn't come from the office. It came from the whole house, as if every door in it had suddenly decided it preferred being shut. Fritz's head turned toward the hall. His calm shifted by a fraction, which for Fritz is the equivalent of an alarm siren, I said. What was that? Coyle froze. His eyes went wide. That's them. Wolfe didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. Archie, I was already moving. I stepped into the hall, and what I saw made my skin tighten. The brass bolt on the front door had slid over by itself. The chain was in place. The deadbolt had turned. I hadn't touched any of them. I tried the handle. It didn't give. Fritz, I said, keeping my voice even because panic in a narrow hallway is contagious. Did you lock this? Fritz was behind me. No, sir. I moved to the little cabinet where we kept the telephone. I picked up the receiver and listened. Nothing, no dial tone, no hum. Just dead air. I tried the office phone. Dead. I tried the kitchen line. Fritz's territory, where callers usually fear him more than Wolfe. Dead. Then I heard it again. The little clicking sounds, faint now, as if other doors deeper in the house were doing the same thing upstairs. Basement, back door. I went to the back of the hall and yanked on the door to the backyard. It might as well have been welded. Wolfe, I called. We're locked in. From the office, Wolfe said, too calmly. That is evident. I went back into the office and found Wolfe still seated, beer untouched, as if we were discussing weather rather than imprisonment. Grant Coyle stood rigid, eyes flicking around like a trapped animal. Fritz hovered near the doorway, hands folded, face composed, but his posture had shifted into readiness. Coyle whispered, They found me. Wolfe's gaze held him. Perhaps. Kramer's name was in my mouth when the doorbell rang again. One sharp ring this time, then silence. No footsteps, no voice. Just that single chime, and then the winter muffling itself. I moved toward the front window and parted the curtain slightly. The street was there, grey, slushy, indifferent. A few pedestrians hurried past with their collars up. A delivery truck idled, belching steam. No one stood on our stoop. Nothing visible, which is what I disliked most. I returned to the office. No one at the door. Wolfe nodded once, as if that confirmed his opinion of humanity. Then the bell was rung to announce presence. Coyle's voice shook. They're in the house. They have to be. How else? Wolfe cut him off. Mr. Coyle, you are presuming. He turned slightly to me. Archie confirmed the windows. That was sensible enough to make me feel better for 3 seconds. I went room to room with Fritz behind me. We checked the front parlor windows. Locked. The dining room. Locked. The kitchen. Locked. The basement window, latched and barred. The little side window near the stairs. Locked. Everything secure. Too secure. Even the cellar door that Fritz keeps bolted with German thoroughness was fastened. It always is. The problem wasn't that something had been opened. The problem was that everything had been closed. On our way back to the office, I tried the little internal extension system. No voice. No buzz. Whoever had cut the lines had done it thoroughly, either from outside, which would require access and time, or from inside, which would require nerve. That last thought was the one that tasted bad back in the office. Wolfe watched my face and didn't ask. He hates questions when he can read answers. Windows secure, I said. All lines dead. Back door won't open. Grant Coyle's hands lifted helplessly. So what do we do? Wolfe looked at him. We do what we always do, we think. Coyle stared. We're trapped. Yes, Wolfe said. And that is an advantage. Coyle's mouth fell open. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. If you were being hunted in the city, the killer had choices: street, crowd, escape routes. Here, choices are reduced. A trap restricts prey, but it also restricts predator. He paused, listening, not to Coyle's breathing, but to the house. The brownstone was quiet now, holding its breath. Even the radiator seemed to be clanking more politely. Wolfe's voice lowered, and the tone changed. It wasn't dramatic. Wolfe doesn't do drama. It was merely certain. Good, Wolfe said. Now the killer is inside with us, where I can observe. Grant Coyle made a sound like a man realizing he has stepped into a colder room. Inside? You're sure? Wolfe's eyes held him. Every lock in this house engaged within seconds. Telephones cut, exits disabled. These are not the acts of a man waiting on the sidewalk, I said. Unless he's got remote-controlled locks. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me with faint contempt. Do not be absurd. This is an old house. It has no remote controls. It has only habits, and habits require hands. Fritz said quietly. Sir, should I fetch the shotgun? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Number Fritz, you will fetch coffee. Fritz blinked once, then nodded, because Fritz understands that Wolfe's calm is not carelessness. It is method. When Fritz left, Coyle took a step toward Wolfe's desk, voice urgent. Mr. Wolfe, I can tell you why someone would do this. It's because of what I found. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Now we approach the reason you are here. Speak, Coyle swallowed, then glanced at me. Who is he, Mr. Archie Goodwin? Wolfe said. My assistant, also my nuisance. Speak as if he is furniture. Coyle's mouth tightened. All right, I'm an auditor, private, not for big firms' special cases. I was hired to review the finances of a winter relief foundation. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A charity. Yes, Coyle said, but not small. Old money, big donors. They make a show every winter. Gala press, all that, I found. His voice snagged. I found a second set of books. I felt my shoulders tighten. Wolfe's face did not change, but his eyes got slightly brighter, which is how you know you've handed him a toy he likes, Coyle went on. Summoner's been diverting funds, not sloppy, not a little, millions over years. They've been hiding it inside legitimate disbursements, vendor payments, logistics, things no one reads. Wolfe nodded faintly. And you read them? I did, Coyle said. And when I tried to report it, quietly, my office was broken into. My files were copied, my assistant was threatened. Then this morning, those men, Wolfe's voice was mild. And now you have brought your danger to my door. Coyle's eyes pleaded. Because you can solve it. Because if I die, the truth dies with me. Wolfe's gaze held him. Truth rarely dies with one man. It merely becomes inconvenient. Coyle's hands clenched. I have names, Mr. Wolfe, specific names. That was when the house made another sound, soft, subtle, almost polite. A footstep, not in the hall, not on the stairs. Above us, on the second floor. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe did not look surprised. He looked satisfied. "Archie," Wolfe said quietly. "The killer is not merely inside. He is moving." I slid my hand into my coat pocket where I kept a small, comforting piece of metal, and I forced my voice to stay light. "All right," I said. "Which room upstairs do you want him in?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "None. I want him to believe he has secured the house." Another footstep sounded overhead, closer to the front stairwell. Grant Coyle's face went paper. "White, he's coming down." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "Then, Mr. Coyle, you will do as you should have done at the beginning." Coyle swallowed. "What?" Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "You will give me the names." And as he said it, the office door behind us, left slightly ajar, began to swing inward, slowly, without anyone touching it, as if the brownstone itself had decided to let the danger enter properly. Chapter 2. The office door kept swinging inward, the way a polite hostess opens a parlor door for a guest, slow, deliberate, and certain it has a right to. I had my hand in my coat pocket on the little comforting lump of metal, and Grant Coyle had the eyes of a man who has just realized he picked the wrong church to pray in. The door opened all the way. It was Fritz. He stood there with a tray, 2 cups of coffee, and the expression of a man who has seen human panic before and considers it a messy substitute for proper housekeeping. "Coffee, sir," Fritz said to Wolfe, as if the house weren't locked up like a steel box and a murderer weren't strolling overhead. Wolfe didn't blink. "Thank you, Fritz. Put it down." Fritz did, carefully, because Fritz believes furniture deserves respect even when human life is being threatened. Then he looked at me. His eyes flicked. A silent question. Footsteps. Locks. Trouble. I nodded once. Fritz's jaw set. It was the nearest I've ever seen him come to a snarl. Grant Coyle made a sound that was half relief and half humiliation. It is never, only," Wolfe said mildly. He lifted his cup, tested the temperature with a sip, and set it down with a small grimace of satisfaction. Then he looked at me. "Archie, confirm again." "I was about to," I said. "I like confirming. It makes me feel useful." I went back into the hall and began the inventory, the way you inventory a fire. Quickly, thoroughly, and with an eye on what will kill you first. The front door was secured in 3 ways: bolt, chain, deadbolt, and all 3 were engaged. The little brass knob on the deadbolt was the chain lay tight, not rattling loose. Back unless someone has pulled them shut from the inside with intent. The back bolt turned, and the little hook that Fritz uses like a signature was in place. The basement door at the foot of the stairs. Even the little side window near the stairs, which I always forget, and Fritz always remembers, was locked. It wasn't just sealed, it was synchronized. I returned to the office and said, if this house were a bank, it would be the one that denies loans to saints. Grant Coyle ran a hand through his wet hair. Then we're trapped. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. We are contained. That's a fancy word for trapped, I said. It is a more accurate one, Wolfe replied. Traps are made for prey, containment is made for observation. Observation of what? Coyle demanded. You said the killer's inside. How can you know? Wolfe held his coffee cup and regarded the man over it. Because you did not bring a locksmith with you, Mr. Coyle, you brought fear. Yet every lock engaged within seconds, that required either preparation or competence. No one prepared the locks from the sidewalk. Coyle swallowed. Unless someone followed me in. That is possible, Wolfe agreed. But unlikely. Fritz opened the front door only long enough to admit you. If someone slipped in, Fritz would have seen him. Fritz said quietly, "Yes, sir." Wolfe's eyes shifted to the ceiling as another faint sound came, wood whispering somewhere above us. Not a step now, but a settling, like a door being eased shut upstairs. Coyle's voice broke. "He's up there." Wolfe's tone stayed mild. "Perhaps, or perhaps you are merely listening to your own imagination. Either way, we proceed as if a murderer is within 10 yards. I went to the desk phone again out of habit. Dead. Then to the office extension line Wolfe keeps for summoning Fritz. Dead. Whoever had killed the lines had done it completely. "Phones are still out," I said. Wolfe nodded. "Good. Then no one will interrupt us with foolishness." I stared. "You call this good?" "I call it pure," Wolfe said. "We have a closed system. Inputs are limited, outputs are controlled." Coyle's hands lifted. "You're talking like this is a puzzle." Wolfe's eyes hardened. "It is a puzzle with blood." "That's Wolfe's idea of comfort. An intellectual label," I said. "All right, Grant. You said you have names. Let's hear them before somebody decides you shouldn't." Coyle's gaze darted to the hall, then back to Wolfe. "I didn't steal money," he blurted. "I stole records." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Records of what?" "Bribery," Coyle said, the word coming out like he'd bitten into something bitter. "City permits, private inspectors, a whole pipeline. I was auditing the Winter Relief Foundation because they're renovating 3 buildings, shelters, clinics, and I found payments that didn't match any real work. I followed them, and," he swallowed. "They weren't paying for supplies. They were paying to make permits appear, to make inspection reports clean." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Corruption in municipal approvals is not novel." "It is when it is organized," Coyle said urgently. "Not one bribe, not a man slipping cash to a clerk. This was a list, names, dates, amounts, which inspector signed which certificate, which permit clerk stamped which application. It was like a menu." Wolfe's eyes sharpened slightly at the word menu, offended by the misuse. Coyle rushed on. "I took copies, then I took the originals because copies can be denied. Originals can't. I put them in my briefcase and ran. That's when my office got hit. That's when, this morning, the men with the gun," I said. "Yes." Coyle's breathing sped up. "They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to end the file." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, heavy and calm. "You took bribery records tied to city permits and private inspectors, and you expected to remain alive." Coyle's jaw clenched. "I expected to get them to someone who could use them." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And you selected me as your armored courier. I selected you as the only man I could reach who would believe the records and not sell me out." Coyle snapped. Then immediately looked sorry, because snapping at Wolfe is like snapping at a stove. Wolfe ignored the tone. "Where are the records now?" Coyle hesitated. I said, "Grant, if you tell me you left them in a taxi, I'll personally throw you out the window, even if it won't open." Coyle's hand went to his briefcase. "Here," he said hoarsely. "Right here." Wolfe's eyes flicked to the case. "Put it on that table." Coyle obeyed, setting it on the side table by the chair. His fingers lingered on the handle, as if letting go might be fatal. Wolfe regarded it. "You have made yourself a target, and my house a theater?" "Theater?" Coyle echoed. Wolfe's lips compressed. The locks clicking together, the phones dying together, the exits refusing together. "This is not random. It is staged. It is meant to produce a mood. Fear is a tool. Someone wants us frightened, confused, and hurried." I said, "Somebody wants us sloppy." "Precisely," Wolfe replied. "I refuse." That was the moment I decided I didn't like being in a sealed box with a man who refused. Refusal is brave, but it doesn't stop bullets. Wolfe's eyes moved to Fritz. "Fritz." "Yes, sir." "You will remain in the kitchen and the dining room," Wolfe said. "You will not go upstairs. You will not go into the basement if you hear anything. You will announce it loudly. Fritz's jaw tightened. Sir, I do not like leaving you. You will obey? Wolfe said. Fritz hesitated a fraction, then nodded. Yes, sir. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, you will remain where I can see you, unless I instruct otherwise. I grunted. So much for heroics. Wolfe ignored that too, and lifted his eyes toward the hall. And now, he said, I want everyone currently in this house in this room. I blinked. Everyone currently. Wolfe, it's us and Fritz and Mr. Panzer. Wolfe said. I stared. Saul Panzer is here. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You are observant only when it amuses you. Mr. Panzer arrived at 10:15 to report on a matter involving a man who sells counterfeit insurance policies in Queens. I instructed him to wait in the front room. When the locks engaged, he ceased waiting and began listening. That was Wolfe. He could have mentioned Saul earlier, but mentioning things is not his hobby. Solving them is. As for the locksmith, Wolfe went on, he is also here. I blinked again. We have a locksmith in the house, and we're locked in. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Yes, which is why I will speak to him before you speak to anyone else. He raised his voice. Not much, but enough to carry. Mr. Panzer, Mr. Rindle. Come in. From the hall came a soft step, then another, and Saul Panzer entered the office with the calm of a man who does not believe in surprise. Saul is lean, grey-eyed, and polite in the way a lock is polite, silent, firm and impossible to argue with. He nodded once to Wolfe, once to me, and let his gaze slide over Grant Coyle as if taking his measure. Behind Saul came a smaller man with a leather bag in his hand, and a face that looked permanently apologetic. He wore wire, rim glasses, a heavy scarf, and the expression of someone who had accepted an invitation to inspect a difficult lock and had stumbled into a murder play instead. Mr. Wolfe, he said, voice careful. Caleb Rindle. Wolfe grunted. Yes, you are a locksmith and security consultant. Yes, Rindle said, and looked at the front door as if it had insulted him. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then you will find it interesting that my house has secured itself without your participation. Rindle's brows rose. Secured itself. Every lock engaged simultaneously, I said. Phones dead, exits sealed, no obvious entry. Rindle's mouth tightened with professional offense. That's not. He stopped, glanced at Wolfe, and amended himself. That is unusual. Wolfe gestured to a chair. Sit, all of you. We sat, Coyle stiff and sweating. Saul relaxed in that way only disciplined men can manage. Rindle clutching his bag like a life preserver, and me in my chair, wishing I had brought a warmer coat and a less complicated life. Wolfe looked at Saul. Mr. Panzer, you will stand by the door. Saul nodded and moved to the office doorway, taking a position that allowed him to see the hall while not blocking it. He didn't show a weapon, but you could feel one the way you feel weather coming. Wolfe then looked at Rindle. Mr. Rindle, explain to me how an old brownstone engages every lock at once. Rindle swallowed. It can't. Not unless someone installed a central locking system. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I have not. Rindle hesitated. Then it would require multiple hands or mechanical linkage. I snorted. Mechanical linkage in this house would require a team of engineers and the blessing of the city. Rindle looked pained. Yes, which suggests deliberate locking, door by door. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Yet it occurred within seconds. Rindle nodded reluctantly. Then whoever did it was positioned to do it quickly, I said. Inside. Rindle glanced at Saul, then at Wolfe, then at me. Yes. Grant Coyle's voice shook. So it's one of us. Wolfe's gaze held him. Yes. Coyle's hands lifted. But I just got here. Wolfe's tone was cool. Then you are either innocent or exceptionally efficient. Coyle swallowed hard. You think I locked your house? I think you brought the reason for locking, Wolfe replied. Not necessarily the hand. Wolfe turned his eyes to the briefcase on the table. You claim you have bribery records. Coyle nodded quickly. I do. Wolfe gestured. Open it. Coyle's fingers fumbled at the latches. He popped them and lifted the lid. Inside were papers, some folders, a thin binder, a manila envelope, and a pad with his notes. He exhaled with relief. See, he said, too eagerly. It's all here. Wolfe did not look impressed. Is it? Coyle blinked. Yes, it's. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. Mr. Coyle, you are an auditor. Do not say yes when you have not counted. Coyle swallowed and began flipping binder, envelope, folder. His breathing sped up. His fingers moved faster. Then he froze. The manila envelope was empty. He stared at it as if it had betrayed him. No, he whispered. No, it was. He looked up, wild-eyed. It was here. Wolfe's eyes went very still. What was in that envelope? Coyle's voice cracked. The originals. The list. Names, dates, amounts. The permit clerks, the private inspectors, the payments, the everything. I felt my stomach drop, and now it's not. Coyle's face went white. Someone took it. Rindle's hand tightened on his bag. Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe raised a finger, and the locksmith stopped like a man obeying gravity. Wolfe looked at Saul. No one leaves this room. Saul's voice was quiet. No one was going to. Wolfe then regarded the four of us with the calm of a man considering chess pieces. We have established two facts, he said. First, the lockdown was planned and executed from within. Second, the object of that plan, the bribery records, has already been removed from Mr. Coyle's possession while he was under my roof. Coyle's voice was ragged. But I never let go of the case. I said, you let go of the handle in my office 10 minutes ago. Coyle stared at me. I didn't, I said. If I stole your records, I'd at least steal your tie too, out of pity. Wolfe's mouth tightened. This is not time for wit, Archie. Then I'm in trouble, I said. Wolfe ignored me. He leaned forward slightly. Eyes narrowed. The person who removed that envelope had to know what to take. He did not steal the entire case. He selected precisely the originals. Rindle whispered. That suggests knowledge. Yes, Wolfe said. And urgency. Coyle's hands trembled. They'll kill me. Wolfe's voice was mild. They may try. Coyle's eyes snapped to Saul. He has a gun. Saul's voice stayed quiet. I have discretion. Wolfe looked at Coyle as if correcting a child. Mr. Coyle, your life is currently of secondary interest. The primary interest is the records. Without them, the murder becomes simple. With them, it becomes profitable. Coyle swallowed, horrified. You're saying they'll kill me because they can't get the file back? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. They have already gotten it back. The room went silent except for the radiator's faint clank, like an old man clearing his throat at an awkward moment. Wolfe's gaze moved from face to face. Mine Coyle's, Rindle's, Saul's. Now, he said, we proceed as I prefer. No wandering, no hysteria, and no improvisation. He nodded once toward the hall. Fritz will bring refreshments. Mr. Panzer will remain at the door. Mr. Rindle will explain every lock in this house to me. And Mr. Coyle. Coyle looked up, desperate. Yes. Wolfe's eyes hardened. You will tell me the names you stole. Coyle swallowed. I don't have the envelope. Wolfe's voice turned icy. You have a mind, use it, recite. If you cannot, then you have brought me nothing but noise, and I will be displeased. Coyle's lips parted, his eyes closed for a second, as if praying. Then he began, haltingly, naming names, permit offices, inspectors, contractors, intermediaries, each one sounding like a stone dropped into a deep well. As he spoke, I watched the others. Saul's face was still, but his eyes missed nothing. Rindle's hands fidgeted, betraying him. Wolfe's expression remained calm, but I could tell from the way his fingers touched together that he was building a structure quietly, methodically. And in the middle of Coyle's recitation, something upstairs creaked again. This time not a settling, not a door, but a single heavy thump, as if something had been set down hard on the floor. Coyle's voice faltered. Rindle's head snapped up. Saul's gaze sharpened. Wolfe did not move, but his eyes narrowed to slits. "Archie," Wolfe said softly. That sounded like weight. I kept my voice light because my throat had tightened. Maybe the killer dropped his conscience. Wolfe's eyes stayed on the ceiling, or he has found something to use. And then from the hall, Fritz's voice called, "Too loud, too controlled. Mr. Wolfe, the back door knob is turning." Chapter 3. Fritz's voice from the hall, calm, too loud, said, "Mr. Wolfe, the back door knob is turning." That sentence didn't belong in our house. The back door is Fritz's kingdom. It opens when Fritz opens it and stays shut. When Fritz says it stays shut. A turning knob meant either Fritz had finally gone mad or someone was trying to teach the brownstone a new habit. Saul Panzer slipped out first, silent and smooth. I followed, because I have never been able to resist standing next to trouble and pretending I'm only passing through. Fritz was already near the kitchen entry, shoulders square, face composed in the way that means he's prepared to do something unpleasant neatly. We could see the back door from the hall. The brass knob turned slowly, steady pressure, patient, as if a hand were testing us. Then it stopped. Then it turned again, harder. Like irritation, Saul said, "Lo, who's there?" No answer. The knob turned once more, and we heard the latch click, uselessly, because the bolt was thrown and the deadbolt was set. No one outside could slide those. No one outside could turn an interior knob with that confidence, unless the world had decided to rewrite carpentry. I looked at Fritz, the bolt still thrown. "Yes, sir," Fritz said. "Then whoever's turning that knob is on our side of the bolt," I said, "which means either the door is haunted or the basement is." Saul's eyes narrowed. "Basement." We went to the basement door at the foot of the stairs. It was locked. I tested it. Solid. Saul tested it. Different angle. Same result. Above us, the back door knob stopped, as if whoever was turning it had decided not to perform once we started paying attention. Fritz produced a key ring with reluctance and handed it over. Saul unlocked the basement door, eased it open and waited. Nothing came at us. No gun barrel. No boot. No breath. We went down. The basement corridor smelled like stone, furnace dust, and stored wood. The honest stink of a place that doesn't get invited upstairs. The inner door that led to the yard steps was bolted from our side. Firm, the little window to the street was latched and barred. No sign of forced entry. No sign of anything, except the house doing what it always did, standing there while people made trouble inside it. We came back up. The knob had stopped. The kitchen was quiet. The brownstone looked innocent again, which is one of the ways it insults you. Saul said quietly, "Summonane wanted us downstairs." "A diversion," I agreed. "To buy time." Fritz's jaw tightened. "Upstairs," he said. We returned to the office. Wolfe had not moved. He rarely does, but his stillness was sharper now, the way a cat can be still and still be hunting. Grant Coyle sat rigidly, hands clenched, eyes too wide. Caleb Rindle, the locksmith consultant, hugged his leather bag as if it were afloat in deep water. Saul resumed his post at the door without being told. Wolfe's eyes met mine. "Report, back door knob turned," I said. "No one outside, basement secure." Conclusion, someone inside wanted us distracted. Wolfe nodded once, as if we had confirmed the price of coffee. "Yes." He indicated Coyle's briefcase. "Now we examine what remains of your papers." Coyle fumbled the case open again and handed Wolfe a binder and folders. Wolfe began to scan, not reading like a clerk, but hunting like a man who knows the one line that matters will be buried under dullness. I leaned forward. Rindle watched Wolfe's hands. Saul watched the hall. Wolfe turned a page, then another, and stopped. His eyes narrowed. He held the sheet toward the lamp, then laid it flat and tapped a thick finger on a penciled notation in the margin. "Observe," he said. I looked. The handwriting was not Coyle's, too blunt, too impatient. The words were underlined twice. "While 35 brownstone included in package." My stomach tightened. "That's us." Coyle stared, shocked. "I didn't write that." "Naturally you did not," Wolfe said. "Auditors do not label residences as packages. Criminals do." Coyle's voice shook. "What does it mean?" "It means," Wolfe said, voice calm and heavy, "that you were not merely hunted, you were delivered." Coyle's face went pale. "Delivered? To your house?" "To this house," Wolfe corrected. "To a closed system. Someone wanted you here, frightened enough to accept my roof, so the building could be sealed, and your envelope removed without outside interference," I said. "And now the brownstone is part of somebody's arrangement." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Yes, which offends me." Rindle swallowed. "Mr. Wolfe, if the locks were engaged so quickly," Wolfe cut him off with a look. "The locks were part of a staged performance. They were meant to create panic and confusion. Panic makes people sloppy. Sloppy people misplace things." Coyle's hands trembled. "But I never let that case out of my sight." "You let it out of your hands," I said, 10 minutes ago." Coyle's eyes flicked to me wild. If I stole your records," I said, "I'd also steal your tie out of pity. That isn't my style." Wolfe's gaze remained on the paper. "The thief selected precisely the envelope of originals. He did not want your notes or your binder. He wanted names and dates that can convict, that indicates knowledge and urgency." As if to underline the point, the house supplied another cue. A heavy thud came from upstairs. Blunt, solid, not a creak or a settling. It sounded like something weighty being dropped or knocked over on purpose. Coyle jolted. Rindle flinched. Saul's hand moved inside his coat with quiet certainty. Fritz's shoulders tightened. Wolfe merely listened. "That," I said softly, "is not the radiator." "No," Wolfe replied. "It is movement." Coyle swallowed hard. "He's up there." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "He has been up there." The thud was an announcement, another piece of theater, a staged performance. I muttered, and Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. Approval, almost. Wolfe looked at Saul. "Mr. Panzer and Mr. Goodwin will inspect the stairwell only. No rooms, no wandering." "Wandering is my hobby," I said, and went. Saul took the lead. We moved into the hall and up the stairs slowly. The runner carpet was clean, Fritz's pride, and that's why the stain showed immediately. Wet grit. Not much. Just a scatter of city sidewalk salt and dirty slush, glistening faintly in the light. Fresh cold. I crouched and ran a finger along it. Saul's eyes went to my hand, then up the stairs. "I haven't been upstairs," I said. "Fritz wears slippers. Coyle's been glued to Wolfe's chair that came from outside." We climbed 2 more steps. There were faint partial prints. Careful. Edge weighted as if whoever tracked it had tried to minimize the mess and failed by a teaspoon. Saul's voice was low. "Fresh." "Fresh," I agreed. "And it means the intruder came in wet." We reached the landing and paused. The second floor hall was dim, doors shut, no visible movement. But the air had that faint, drafty smell of street damp, like a coat that had just been outside. Saul whispered. "How did he enter?" "All doors sealed." "By timing," I said, during the clicking, during the commotion, while we were staring at locks and dead phones. Saul's gaze sharpened, house helping him hide time. That was exactly it. The synchronized lockdown had been the best distraction in the world, loud enough to grab attention, frightening enough to make people rush, and old-fashioned enough to seem mysterious. While we were reacting, a man with wet boots had gone upstairs, lifted the envelope, and provided a thud on cue to keep us looking up instead of thinking straight. We went back down. Wolfe read my face as soon as we entered. "You found evidence." "Wet grit on the stairs," I said. "Fresh sidewalk salt. Somebody tracked in from the street and went upstairs." Coyle's voice cracked. But how? Silence, Wolfe said, and Coyle obeyed. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. Then we have confirmation. The intruder is inside and has been inside long enough to act. The house did not help him willingly, Archie. It helped him because it is predictable, and he used predictability as camouflage. I said, which means he planned it. Yes, Wolfe said softly, and planning leaves structure. Structure leaves flaws. He tapped the penciled notation again. This phrase reveals purpose. This house is included in a package, an arrangement involving those bribery records. Someone intended my residence to be a component, either as a staging area, a distraction, or a disposal site. Fritz's voice was quiet, controlled. Sir, what do you want me to do? Wolfe didn't look at him. Bring the lamp from the front room and place it in the hall, aimed at the stairs. We will remove shadows. Fritz nodded and left. Wolfe looked at Saul. You will remain at the foot of the stairs. No one ascends without my permission. Saul nodded once. Understood. Wolfe looked at me. And you will summon Inspector Kramer. I blinked. Phones are dead. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Then you will use the window, Mr. Goodwin shout. Make a nuisance of yourself. It is one of your talents. Coyle's breath came fast. He'll kill me. Wolfe's gaze fixed on him, calm and terrible. He may try, but he has already taken what he came for. Now he must decide whether he dares to leave, and that decision will be made inside this house, under my observation. He lifted his eyes toward the ceiling and spoke as if addressing a man sitting in the dark with wet boots and a stolen envelope. You have recovered your papers, Wolfe said. Now you must decide whether your performance ends quietly or with another corpse. The house stayed silent, but somewhere above, very faintly, a floorboard creaked, just once, like someone shifting his weight, reminded that time was no longer his alone. Chapter 4. When Fritz set the lamp in the hall and aimed it at the stairs, the brownstone looked briefly like a stage that had been lit for the first time in years. Shadows withdrew to corners, sulking. The runner carpet gleamed with its fresh grit like a clue that had been embarrassed into showing itself. Wolfe watched the new light with approval. He likes illumination, literal and otherwise. Now, he said, we will sweep. Controlled. No wandering. Grant Coyle swallowed. Sweep? You mean search the house? I mean, Wolfe replied, that we will remove the intruder's advantage without granting him our throats. He looked at Saul. Mr. Panzer, you will remain between me and the stairs. Saul's voice was quiet. I already am. Wolfe's eyes moved to Caleb Rindle. Mr. Rindle, you will accompany Mr. Goodwin. You will observe the locks and mechanisms. You will not touch anything until instructed. Rindle nodded, pale. Yes, sir. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Fritz. Fritz, you will remain on the first floor. If you hear a sound, you will announce it. Fritz's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. And Mr. Coyle, Wolfe continued, will sit in that chair and remain alive. Coyle's eyes widened. I. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You requested a shield. Sit behind it. Coyle sat. I took Rindle out into the hall. The lamp made the space feel less like a trap and more like a hallway, which is a small comfort unless you're the one trapped. Saul stayed close enough that I could feel his presence like a locked door. Fritz hovered near the kitchen entry, hands folded, face calm in the way that means he's ready to use them. We started at the front parlor because it was nearest, and because Wolfe insists on sequence. We checked windows again, then doors, then the little internal locks that had clicked like teeth. Everything appeared normal, too normal. The bolts were engaged, yes, but no scratches, no fresh gouges. It was as if the house had chosen to secure itself politely. That's what bothered Wolfe. And it bothered me. Locks don't politely engage themselves. We moved to the guest room on the first floor, the little room Wolfe sometimes uses for clients. He can't discourage quickly enough, and for Saul when Saul has to wait. The door was shut. It should not have been. Fritz keeps it open for air unless someone is in it, and no one should have been. I reached for the knob, Saul said softly. Wait, I paused. Rindle leaned in, eyes narrowing behind his glasses. He crouched and examined the lower hinge side, then the gap under the door. His face shifted. Professional offense again. There, he whispered. He pointed. A thin line, almost invisible, ran from the base of the door frame into the shadow by the baseboard, like a strand of hair. If you didn't know to look for it, you'd never see it. If you did, it looked like a lie, I murmured. Rindle nodded. Actuator line, a pull line. It can be used to manipulate the spindle inside the knob assembly. Saul's voice was flat. So the door can be locked from a distance. Yes, Rindle said, and his mouth tightened, but not with ordinary hardware. I looked at the line again. It disappeared into the baseboard seam. Then, if you followed it with your eyes, into the narrow space behind the radiator nearby. We didn't touch it. We didn't even breathe on it. I called back over my shoulder, Wolfe, we've got something. Wolfe came into the hall reluctantly, like a man leaving a warm chair for a cold fact. His bulk filled the doorway, eyes narrowed, expression displeased. At the disruption, at the intruder, at physics. He looked at the door, then at the thin line, then at Rindle. Explain, Rindle swallowed. It's an actuator line tied into the knob spindle. Someone rigged the door so it can be locked and unlocked remotely, by pulling or releasing the line. But that's only part of it. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Proceed. Rindle gestured toward the door hardware. These old brownstone knobs use spindles and mortise locks. To rig them remotely, you'd have to install a linkage in the spindle housing or replace the internal cam. That's expensive and illegal. Coyle's voice came from behind Wolfe. Thin, illegal. Rindle nodded. It violates building code and fire safety. It can trap occupants. That's why it's illegal. And because it's sophisticated, it's deliberate. Wolfe's eyes narrowed further, so the synchronized clicking. Rindle's mouth tightened. Could be achieved by running multiple actuator lines from a central point, pulling them in sequence or simultaneously. It would require planning and access. Someone had to open the spindles, install the linkage, and run lines through baseboards and radiator gaps. That is not done in a hurry, I said. So we didn't get trapped by panic. We got trapped by design. Wolfe grunted. Yes. He leaned closer, careful not to touch. Where does the line lead? Rindle pointed toward the radiator. Behind there, or beneath it, Saul said quietly. Let me. He reached. Not to the line, but to the radiator's side, and eased himself down with a steadiness that made it clear he had done worse in tighter spaces. He slid 2 fingers behind the radiator and felt cautious. Then he nodded once. There's a box, Saul said. Small. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Remove it. Saul's hand emerged with a small metal receiver box. Black, no larger than a paperback, with a thin antenna wire and a cluster of tiny pulleys fixed to one side. It looked out of place in our house the way modern malice always does. Cheap metal against old plaster. Saul held it away from his body. Warm, he said. Rindle leaned in, eyes wide. It was used recently. How recently? I asked. Rindle swallowed. Minutes. That casing would cool fast in this room. Wolfe stared at the box, and for the first time since the locks clicked, his expression shifted from annoyance to genuine interest, the kind that is dangerous to the person who caused it. The mechanism was activated moments ago, Wolfe said, as if stating the temperature. Therefore, the operator is still here. Coyle's breath hitched. He's watching. Wolfe's gaze slid to him. Almost certainly. I said, what does it do besides lock doors? Rindle pointed to the pulley cluster. It can pull multiple lines. If the lines are routed to several lock spindles, one receiver could control several doors. The operator could trigger it with a transmitter. It's remote lockwork. Saul's voice was quiet. So he can seal the house and open one door when it suits him. Wolfe nodded. Yes, a single exit can be granted. Selectively. Rindle's voice dropped. This is a trap. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. Yes, but not an impulsive one. I looked at the warm box in Saul's hand and felt my stomach tighten in a new way. This wasn't a killer who had been cornered. This was a killer who had built the corner and then invited us into it. Wolfe's voice was calm, and that calm was the worst thing in the room. The intruder did not trap us out of panic, he said. He trapped us to force a trade. Coyle swallowed hard. A trade. Wolfe's eyes moved to the empty manila envelope in Coyle's briefcase, then back to the warm receiver box. He has recovered the original records, Wolfe said. Yet he remains. Therefore he wants something else. I said. What could he want? Wolfe's gaze went to Coyle, then to me, then to the ceiling as if he could see through floors. He wants assurance, Wolfe said. He wants silence. He wants to leave without risk, and he will attempt to purchase that with our fear. Saul's eyes hardened. Or with a hostage. Wolfe nodded once. Yes. He turned to Rindle. How is this controlled? A transmitter. Rindle nodded, throat tight. A handheld transmitter, small, pocket-sized, it would send a signal to this receiver. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then the operator must keep it close. And warm, I said. Like the box. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Exactly. He looked at Saul. Mr. Panzer, take the receiver to my office. Do not sever the lines yet. Saul nodded and moved. The box steady in his hand. Wolfe then looked at me. Archie, we will continue the sweep. Controlled, we will find the transmitter, the operator, and the leverage he believes he has. I glanced at the wired guest room door. And if he's behind that door, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then he is foolish, but he is not foolish. He has already demonstrated planning. Planning men do not hide in obvious closets. Coyle's voice trembled. Mr. Wolfe, what do I do? Wolfe's tone was mild. You will remain alive, that is your contribution. As Wolfe turned back toward the office, Fritz appeared at the kitchen entry, face composed, hands folded, but his eyes sharp. Mr. Wolfe, Fritz said quietly, Summoner has moved the front curtain. Wolfe stopped. In the brownstone, curtains move for drafts for hands or for watchers. Chapter 5 Fritz's report about the curtain would have sounded trivial anywhere else. In Wolfe's house it was a declaration of intent. Fritz does not fuss about fabric. If he says a curtain moved, it moved because someone touched it, or because someone wanted us to believe they did. Wolfe stared toward the front room, as if he could see through plaster and drapes. Mr. Panzer, he said. Saul's voice came from the office doorway. Yes. You will stand at the front window, Wolfe said. But you will not expose yourself. If you see anyone, you will memorize him. Saul went. Wolfe turned his attention back to our little collection, an auditor whose papers had been emptied, a locksmith whose bag suddenly looked less like a toolkit and more like an alibi, and me trying not to picture the brownstone as a coffin with good furniture. Wolfe said to Caleb Rindle, The actuator rig is sophisticated. How long to install such a system? Rindle swallowed. Hours. Mr. Wolfe, not minutes. You'd have to open spindles, route lines through baseboards. Hide them. It's work. Wolfe nodded. Then it was installed before Mr. Coyle arrived. Coyle flinched. But I came straight here. Exactly, Wolfe said. Which makes you a courier, not the architect. Coyle's face tightened. Courier for what? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. For a meeting you have not yet mentioned. Coyle stared, then looked away, and that small shift told me Wolfe had hit the right nerve. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction. Mr. Coyle, Wolfe said softly. You are frightened, but you are not stupid. A man who steals bribery records does not plan to sit in a chair and wait for death. He plans to hand them to someone who can use them. Who? Coyle's mouth worked. Wolfe's tone remained mild. If you lie to me now, your usefulness will end. Coyle swallowed hard and blurted it. A reporter, I said. A reporter with a name. Coyle hesitated, then said, Lon Cohen. That made the room feel slightly more normal, because Lon is as much a fixture in our lives as Wolfe's orchids and Fritz's sauerbraten. Except Lon has less fragrance and more appetite. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Cohen, at what time?" "Midnight," Coyle said, voice strained. "He told me, late enough that the office would be empty. He said he'd send a car if I was followed," he said. Coyle's voice cracked. "He said he could protect the story." Wolfe grunted. "Mr. Cohen cannot protect a story. He can only publish one." Coyle's hands clenched. "I had copies. I made copies before I took the originals. I was going to give him the copies." I felt my shoulders tighten. "Where are the copies now?" Coyle stared at me, then at Wolfe. "Not here," he said quickly. "I didn't bring them. I'm not that reckless." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Where then?" Coyle swallowed. "In a safe deposit box." Kramer's name was in my mouth, but of course Kramer wasn't in the room, and Wolfe didn't need him to snarl. "A safe deposit box," Wolfe repeated. "Whose name?" "Mine," Coyle said. "But it's under a corporate shell, a dummy company. He stopped, ashamed. "I set it up for audits like this. When you find something ugly, you don't keep it in your desk." Wolfe nodded slightly, as if he approved of the prudence while despising the melodrama. "Very well. That explains why the intruder has recovered the originals and still remains." Coyle blinked. "Because he wants the copies." "Yes," Wolfe said. "He wants every version. He wants control of the narrative, and he has already demonstrated a taste for staging." I said. "So he built the lock rig to keep us here until he gets what he wants." Wolfe's gaze slid to me. "You are learning." Coyle's voice shook. "But why not just kill me and leave?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Because if he kills you, he risks losing the location of the copies, and he risks leaving without certainty that Mr. Cohen will not receive them at midnight." Coyle whispered, "He's forcing a trade." Wolfe nodded once. "Precisely." The word trade sat in the room like a cold coin. It meant a bargain with a murderer. It meant one door opened at the right moment and one body pushed through it. Fritz, who had been hovering near the doorway, with the quiet intensity of a man listening to his house breathe, cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "there is something else." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. "Yes, Fritz." Fritz's expression was controlled, but there was a little line beside his mouth that meant irritation, the sort he normally reserves for undercooked eggs. "The pantry latch." I blinked. "Pantry latch," Fritz nodded, almost offended to be discussing such a thing in the middle of murder. "It was replaced today." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Replaced by whom?" "By no one I authorized," Fritz said, and that was Fritz's way of swearing. I said, "How do you know it was replaced?" Fritz looked at me as if I had asked how he knew water was wet. "Because the old latch was brass with a rounded tongue. This one is steel with a squared tongue, and the screws are not the correct size." Rindle's head snapped up. "Steel latch, squared tongue. May I see it?" Wolfe's gaze sharpened at the locksmith. "You may, but you will not touch it without instruction." We moved to the pantry off the kitchen. Fritz went first, because if a murderer is in his house, Fritz would prefer him to die among canned goods, rather than on the rug. Saul stayed at the front, unseen but present. His absence was protective in the way a closed door is protective. The pantry was small, lined with shelves, neat as a ledger. Fritz opened the pantry door and pointed. The latch was on the inside edge, mounted to keep the door snug. It looked ordinary until you looked closely. Then you could see the steel was newer than everything around it, and the screw heads were bright and sharp, not worn. Rindle leaned in, eyes narrowing. "That's the same hardware style as the actuator pulleys," he murmured. "Commercial kit, not a household latch." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Meaning," Rindle swallowed. "Meaning whoever installed the remote lockwork brought parts. And this latch, this could be an anchor point, or a guide, or a concealment." I crouched and examined it. There was a tiny groove beside the latch plate, fresh as if a thin line had been dragged through it repeatedly. "Wolfe," I said. "If I didn't know better, I'd say a wire has been run through here." Fritz's jaw tightened. "That pantry is not used for wires." Wolfe's eyes flicked to Fritz. "When did you first see this latch?" "This morning," Fritz said. "At approximately 9. I was taking inventory. The latch was different. I assumed Mr. Goodwin had." He stopped, glared at me briefly, then corrected himself. "I assumed it was an error in my memory. It was not." I said, 9 this morning. That's hours before Coyle showed up." Coyle's voice came from behind us, thin. "I didn't even know your address until I was told." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Until you were told by whom, Mr. Coyle?" Coyle flinched. Someone called me." Wolfe turned his head slowly. "Someone called you earlier offering protection inside my house." Coyle swallowed. "Yes," I straightened. "Who called you?" Coyle hesitated, then said, "A man. He didn't give his name. He said he knew what I had taken. He said I couldn't go to the police because the police would hand me back, he said." Coyle's voice cracked. "He said NeroWolfe would keep me safe, that I should go there, that it was the only place in the city with a door thick enough to stop fear." Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. "Flattery is a crude lure." Coyle's hands lifted helplessly. "I believed him because 5 minutes later 2 men were waiting near my building." I said, "So the caller wasn't helping you, he was steering you." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and the latch proves the steering began before you arrived." Rarindle whispered, "They had access to this house earlier." Fritz's face was hard now. "No one enters my kitchen without my knowledge." Wolfe looked at him. "Fritz, you are excellent. You are not omniscient." Fritz's jaw worked, offended, but he nodded once because he is also honest. Wolfe's eyes moved back to the latch. "This hardware matches the actuator rig. Therefore the rig's installation included this pantry. Therefore the installer had access to my house for hours." Coyle's voice trembled. How could someone install all that without you noticing?" Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Because I was upstairs with my orchids from 9 to 11. Fritz was occupied. Mr. Goodwin was occupied with his own trivialities, and because the installer likely arrived with a plausible reason." I said, "Like a repair call." Fritz's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "There was a man," he said slowly. "At 10, Wolfe's gaze snapped to him. "A man." Fritz nodded, reluctant. "He said he was from the telephone company. He said there had been a report of line interference. He carried a tool bag. He wore a badge. He was polite." "Polite," I repeated. "That's always the dangerous kind," Fritz continued. "He asked to see the junction box in the basement. I accompanied him. He looked. He tapped. He said it was likely outside and would be corrected. He left." Rindle swallowed. "A tool bag would carry actuator parts easily." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And a false badge would open doors easily." I felt my skin crawl. Not because we had been tricked, that happens in New York every time you buy a hot dog, but because we had been tricked in Wolfe's house. That is like stealing a man's spine. Wolfe turned away from the pantry with slow deliberation, as if he were leaving behind something dirty. He returned to the office and sat in his chair with the exactness of a judge returning to the bench. "Now," Wolfe said, "we have the structure." He ticked points off on thick fingers. 1. The remote lockwork was installed hours ago by a man posing as a telephone worker. 2. Mr. Coyle was called and directed here by a voice that knew what he had stolen and knew where he would be safest, meaning where he would be most controlled. 3. The originals were retrieved quickly upon his arrival. 4. The operator remains because the copies are scheduled to be delivered to Mr. Cohen at midnight. Coyle whispered, "He's going to make me give him the box." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and he will attempt to do it through fear, because fear is the only currency he believes universal." I said, "What's our currency?" Wolfe looked at me. "Intelligence." Then his gaze shifted to the curtained front window, where Saul stood watch, and patience. Saul's voice came from the hall. Quiet. "Someone is on the stoop." Wolfe did not rise. Describe. A man, Saul said. City coat, tool bag. My stomach tightened again. The telephone worker. Saul's voice stayed flat, or someone dressed like him. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, and the calm in his face turned dangerous. Good, Wolfe said softly. Now the performance reaches the act where the actor returns for applause. And somewhere in the house, very faint but unmistakable, the locks clicked once more, not in chorus this time, but singly, like a finger tapping a desk to demand our attention. Chapter 6. The clicks after Saul's report were too crisp for an old house. One lock, then another, like a man tapping his watch to remind us he owned the time. Then came a different sound upstairs, a dragging noise, soft at first, then heavier, as if something weighty were being pulled across floorboards. It stopped with a blunt bump. Silence followed, thick as felt. Coyle's face went chalky. That's Simone. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. His voice stayed calm. Mr. Panzer. Mr. Goodwin. The wired room. Saul was already moving. We went up under the lamp's hard light to the shut guest. Room door we had found rigged. The actuator line still lay taut along the baseboard seam. Saul tried the knob. Locked, he worked the spindle briefly, then stopped. Too much linkage, we force. I put my shoulder in, Saul braced beside me, and we hit it together, controlled weight. No drama. The frame groaned. Hardware complained, and something inside snapped. The door swung inward. The room was dark, curtains drawn, air stale. Saul entered first, angled scanning corners. I followed, hand in my coat pocket. The bed was made, the dresser neat, but the rug was shifted, and the baseboard dust was disturbed. Recent work. Saul crossed to the far wall and ran his fingers along the paneling. He paused at a seam too straight to be old. He pressed. A section gave. He found a hidden latch and pulled. A false panel swung inward. Behind it was a shallow cavity, and a man wedged inside, half-folded, as if he'd been shoved in quickly. He wore an inspector's jacket. Eyes were open, staring at nothing. His throat had the crushed look of a strong hand that didn't stop when bone. Saul checked anyway, then withdrew his fingers. Calm. Report. Saul didn't look away from the body. Crushed, pockets emptied, hidden behind a false panel. Wolfe's voice was flat. So the he whispered. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who is he? A runner, Coyle said, voice shaking. He delivers envelopes. He picks up permit packages. He wears that jacket to get through doors. He works for the ring. I felt my stomach tighten. So the ring reached the brownstone first. Wolfe's reply was calm, almost satisfied. Yes, and Mr. Delaney's pockets were emptied because he carried something worth retrieving. Coyle swallowed hard. He must have had the originals. Possibly, Wolfe said, but his death tells us more. If the ring killed him, they would not crush his throat and hide him in my house. They would remove him, or remove evidence. This is provocation. Saul's voice was quiet. Another predator. Wolfe nodded. Yes, too. The bribery ring wants its records recovered and its operation protected. The other man installed remote lockwork, staged the clicks, stole the envelope, and now steals from the ring. The pieces slid into place with an ugly click of their own. So the ring is hunting Coyle, I murmured, and someone else is hunting the ring. Wolfe's eyes held mine. Precisely that second man has used my house as a sealed stage to force a trade. Coyle's lips trembled. Trade for what? For your copies, Wolfe said, and for my compliance. Fritz's voice came tight behind Wolfe. Sir, there is a dead man in our guest room. Wolfe glanced at him. Yes, Fritz, that is part of the offense. He lifted his voice slightly, not loud, but carrying. mason for any ear behind plaster and rigged spindles. "You have left a corpse in my home," Wolfe said. "That was unwise. Now I will remove your choices." The brownstone answered with silence. Then, faintly, a single click somewhere below, like a lock being tested again, reminding us the stage manager was still at his post. Chapter 7. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the receiver box on a blotter in front of him, as if it were a particularly ugly beetle he intended to classify before crushing. Saul stood by the office door. Fritz hovered in that watchful stillness. That means his house has been insulted, and he is restraining himself only because Wolfe has not yet granted permission to erupt. Grant Coyle looked like a man being kept alive by force of habit. Caleb Rindle held his leather bag on his lap and tried to look like an innocent professional, which is difficult to do when a dead man has just been found behind paneling. Wolfe's eyes moved from face to face, then down to the box, then back up again. His voice was calm, heavy, deliberate. "We will reconstruct the timeline," he said. "Not because it is entertaining, but because it is unavoidable." Coyle swallowed. "Timeline, yes," Wolfe said. "You arrived here frightened and empty-handed, empty of your originals at least. Yet the house had already been prepared to contain you. That preparation required hours, not minutes. Therefore, the crisis this afternoon did not create the lock rig. The lock rig created the crisis." Rindle cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Wolfe, I told you, installing that linkage takes time." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. "Indeed, that is why I am speaking." He raised a thick finger. "At approximately 10 o'clock this morning, Fritz admits a man claiming to be a telephone worker. Tool bag, badge, polite. Fritz escorts him to the basement junction area. The man departs. Within that window, remote lockwork components could be placed, lines routed, and anchor hardware installed, including the pantry latch replaced at 9. Fritz's jaw tightened. "He had no reason to be in my pantry." Wolfe's gaze held him. "A man with a tool bag has reasons wherever he wishes them." He lifted a second finger. "At approximately midday, Mr. Coyle receives a call offering protection inside this house. That caller knew what Mr. Coyle had stolen and knew how to herd him. That is not guesswork, that is guidance." Coyle's voice cracked. "He saved me." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "He delivered you." A third finger, shortly after Mr. Coyle enters, the locks engage in chorus and the telephones go dead. That is the first act of the performance, intended to produce panic and to convince us that the house itself is afraid. I muttered. It worked. Wolfe ignored me. During that distraction, the envelope containing the originals is removed from Mr. Coyle's briefcase. Not the entire case, only the item of value that indicates selection by someone who knew precisely what he wanted. A fourth finger, a thud upstairs, is produced on cue to direct attention upward. Then an apparent manipulation of the back door knob to direct attention downward. Both are stagecraft. Saul's voice was quiet. "Diversions." "Yes," Wolfe said. And finally, when we cease reacting promptly enough, a dragging sound upstairs ends in silence. We force the wired room and find a dead courier. Mr. Delaney, hidden behind paneling, throat crushed, pockets emptied. He let the last details sit in the room like cold iron. Coyle's voice trembled. "So, he was killed today." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Recently. The body had not cooled fully. The concealment was hurried. The pockets were emptied with urgency, not leisure." I said, "Meaning the killer took something off him and didn't have time to be tidy." Wolfe nodded once. "Exactly." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Now, the conclusion. We do not have one predator, we have at least two." Coyle blinked. "Two. The bribery ring," Wolfe said, "which sent Mr. Delaney in an inspector jacket to retrieve what you stole and perhaps to ensure your compliance or your silence. And the second, more interesting predator, who has installed machinery in my house and who has stolen from you and from the ring." Rindle's mouth was tight. "You think the second man killed Delaney?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Yes, the ring does not leave its own courier crushed and hidden in my guest room. That is not cleanup. That is insult. Fritz's voice went stiff. In my guest room. Wolfe glanced at him. Yes, Fritz. In your guest room. The offender has taste for offense. The office went still for a breath outside. The winter wind worried at the street. But the brownstone held its silence like a clenched fist. Wolfe lifted his eyes and spoke as if to the air. The second predator is still inside. The receiver box was warm. The actuator lines were taut. Someone is monitoring, adjusting, triggering. He feels safe enough here to continue directing us. Coyle whispered. He'll kill me. Wolfe's gaze slid to him. Not yet. You are still useful. That is the only protection you possess. Coyle flinched. Wolfe turned his attention to the receiver box again. Now, he said, we test something. I leaned forward. Test what? Knowledge, Wolfe replied. The kind of knowledge a man possesses only if he has put his hands inside a mechanism. He looked at all of us. Me, Fritz, Saul, Coyle, Rindle, his eyes half-lidded, expression offended by the very need for deception. Then Wolfe spoke in a tone of casual certainty that would have convinced a jury if I hadn't seen him do this before. This lock rig was triggered, Wolfe said. By a simple pull, cord run to the pantry latch. Manual, crude. The clicks we heard were produced by the cord being yanked from the basement stairwell. No transmitter, no receiver, merely a line and a strong hand. He paused, watching. Coyle swallowed and stared at the box on the blotter, as if it might bite. Fritz's face stayed hard, but he didn't speak. Saul's eyes remained steady and unreadable. Caleb Rindle spoke too fast. That's not how it works, Rindle said, and the words came out with irritation, professional, immediate, unfiltered. A pull, cord can't synchronize those spindles. You'd need a motorized spool with a stepped cam. Otherwise, the tension differential jams the mortise and the receiver. He stopped, eyes widening slightly as he realized he had stepped onto a board that wasn't there. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. I stayed very still. You intended to leave with the envelope, retrieve the copies, and then decide which side to sell them to. The man's nostrils flared. That's speculation. Wolfe's tone stayed calm. It is deduction. Saul's gun remained steady. Where's the transmitter? The man's jaw worked. I don't have. Saul's eyes didn't change. Don't. The man exhaled, then nodded toward the hall. In the bag, upstairs. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Goodwin, retrieve it. Gladly, I said, and then looked at Saul. Escort. Saul nodded and moved with me into the hall while keeping his attention on the man in the front room. Fritz appeared at the kitchen entry, face tight, ready to explode into efficiency the moment Wolfe permitted it. We went up and found the leather bag in the guest room, right where a nervous consultant would keep it. Inside, under ordinary tools, was a small transmitter unit, crude but effective, the kind you could trigger with a thumb while smiling politely at your victim. I carried it back down and held it up like a trophy I didn't want. Wolfe regarded it without satisfaction. There, he said, is your home, a button. The man in the lamplight, our locksmiths, stared at it with a look that was half anger and half grief, the way a man looks at a ruined instrument. Wolfe's voice turned colder. You plan to leave with the evidence. You plan to herd us with noise and locks. You plan to use the girl as leverage, and you plan to let this house take the blame for your exit. The man's eyes flashed. You don't understand. Wolfe cut him off. I understand perfectly. You made my home into a box with teeth. He paused, then added softly, now I will decide which teeth close first. And as he said it, a distant sound rose from the front stoop, one sharp knock, then another, followed by the faint, unmistakable jingle of a tool bag being set down, as if someone else had arrived for the next act. Chapter 10. The knock on the stoop came again, firm, impatient, and the little jingle of metal that followed told me someone had set a tool bag down like a calling card. Saul's eyes flicked toward the front door. Wolfe didn't turn his head. He had already decided what mattered most, the specimen in his room. Mr. Panzer, Wolfe said mildly, The door. Saul moved to the hall out of sight, and the house answered him with a small click, one of the rigged bolts yielding, as if on command. Saul did not open it yet. He listened, because listening is Saul's way of aiming. Wolfe's gaze stayed on the man we had pulled from the radiator panel. In the lamplight, the face looked tight, controlled, but there was something slightly wrong about the jawline and the hands, something that had struck me earlier and filed itself away. The winter coat had bulked the frame. The cap had hidden hair. The voice had been pitched low. Yet now, with the tension showing, the disguise thinned. Wolfe's voice was flat. "Remove your cap." The locksmith hesitated. Saul's quiet voice carried from the hall. "Do it." The cap came off. Hair tumbled free, dark, cut short, deliberately plain. The face, in the harsher light, resolved into sharper cheekbones, a narrower chin. The hands were not a large man's hands at all. They were strong, yes, but compact, the kind built for tools and switches. Coyle stared. "You're a woman," I supplied. "Merry Christmas." Her eyes flashed at me, then at Wolfe. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed, the way a professional looks when a job turns messy. Wolfe's tone remained calm. "Your impersonation was competent. Your judgment was not. State your name." She swallowed once. "Lena Hark." Wolfe nodded, as if he had expected it. "Miss Hark, you posed as a locksmith consultant named Caleb Rindle. You posed earlier as a telephone worker. You installed illegal remote lockwork in my house. You stole Mr. Coyle's envelope of originals. You crushed Mr. Delaney's throat, and you wrote a note threatening a girl." Lena Hark's jaw tightened. "I didn't crush his throat to be dramatic." He fought. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Violence is always described by its author as necessity." Coyle's voice shook. "Janie, my assistant. Where is she?" Hark's gaze slid to him with faint contempt. "Alive. For now." Saul's voice from the hall was quiet and lethal. "Answer him." Hark exhaled, irritated. "She's at your office. Watched. I needed her key." "And you have it. You placed it in the envelope to compel us." Hark's mouth twitched. "It was proof. You wanted proof. You provided leverage." Wolfe corrected. I said, "And the courier." Hark's eyes flicked to me. Delaney was supposed to bring the originals back to the ring. "I took them first," he realized. He tried to call someone. He fought. I ended it. Wolfe's voice stayed mild. "Then your intent was to steal from the ring." Hark's gaze hardened. The ring was sloppy, too many hands, too much fear. I wanted control. "Control of the copies," Wolfe said. Hark hesitated, then gave a short laugh. "Yes, copies mean options. Options mean money or immunity." Coyle's face crumpled. "You were going to kill me." Hark's eyes were flat. "You were going to talk. That's what auditors do when they think they're heroes." Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. "And the girl?" Hark's jaw clenched. "A lever. I didn't want to use her, but you people don't move unless something screams." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You found that my house does not scream. It judges." Saul re-entered the front room, still watching the hall. Two men outside, real city workers, called about line trouble. Wolfe's mouth tightened. "The ring has arrived to retrieve its property. Convenient." Hark's eyes flicked, calculating again. "Let me go, and you can hand them what they want." Wolfe regarded her as if she were a stain. "Number," he leaned forward a fraction. "Now we address the final point." He lifted the sheet with the penciled notation. "Wu 35 brownstone, included in package," and held it where Hark could see it. "Mr. Coyle did not write this," Wolfe said. "Nor did I. It was written by someone who expected my home to be part of the transaction." Hark's eyes narrowed. "That's just planning." "It is more than planning," Wolfe replied. "It is evidence that the bribery ring intended to use my house as a drop site, a place of reputation, a place where police attention becomes noise. They lured Mr. Coyle here with a promise of protection, because they believed my roof would conceal their exchange." Coyle whispered, They wanted to use you. Wolfe's tone turned icy. Yes, which I find intolerable. He nodded to Saul. Disable the rig. Saul went to the hall and kitchen switch points, and with Rindle's transmitter already in our possession, began severing what could be severed without setting the house on fire. Fritz assisted, grim and efficient, as if he were removing vermin from a pantry. We heard a series of clicks. Different now, not theatrical. Mechanical surrender. Bolts releasing, latches relaxing. The brownstone exhaled. And for the first time since the morning, I heard a sound so sweet it could have been music, the front door's deadbolt turning normally. The door opened. Inspector Kramer stormed in as if the cold had been insulting him personally, and he intended to arrest it. He had two plainclothes men behind him, and the expression of a bulldog, arriving late to a bone it had smelled from blocks away. "What the hell?" Kramer began, then saw Wolfe in the front room, saw Saul's gun, saw Lena Hark standing pale and rigid, and saw me holding a transmitter like a toy I didn't want. His face did what it always does when Wolfe is right. It reddened with rage and gratitude. Wolfe's voice was mild. "Good evening, Inspector. You may take her." Kramer moved, cuffing Lena Hark with relish. "You," he growled. "You're under arrest for—" He glanced at Wolfe. "For whatever Wolfe says you did." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Murder, extortion, impersonation, unlawful restraint, and the installation of illegal lockwork in a private residence." Kramer blinked. "Installation," I said. "Don't ask. It's a long story, and you'll hate all of it." Kramer barked at his men to move, then turned back to Wolfe. "And the bribery ring." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "You will find them on the stoop, 2 men tool bag. They arrived for their package. They will be disappointed." Kramer stormed out again to collect them like overdue mail. When the noise subsided, Wolfe sat back, restored to his chair as if the world had finally resumed proper posture. Fritz stood in the doorway, face still hard, but relief beginning to show in the careful way he straightened a curtain that had been touched. Saul returned to his usual silence. The case ended for him the moment the danger was contained. Coyle sagged into a chair. My assistant, Janie. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Inspector Kramer will dispatch officers. She will be retrieved." Coyle's voice broke. "Thank you." Wolfe's gaze was cool. "Do not thank me for what should never have been required." Coyle swallowed. "You saved us." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "I reclaimed my house." I said, "And your peace and quiet." Wolfe glanced at me. "Mr. Goodwin, do not be frivolous. This was not the house locking itself." He paused, letting the sentence settle like a verdict. He leaned back, eyes half. Lidded again, already retreating toward his orchids and his dinner and the civilized world he insists on maintaining. Outside, Kramer's voice rose in the hall, barking orders. The brownstone's doors stood open at last, admitting winter air and letting it out again, as if the building were relieved to return to being only a home. No longer a box with teeth. No longer a stage for other men's stories. Greed always reaches for what it wants, and it always tries to prove it has power, I said. And if he doesn't have her? Wolfe's eyes went cold. Then his note was bluff, and bluff is a form of panic. Rindle swallowed hard. This is insane. Wolfe's gaze slid to him. No, Mr. Rindle. This is civilized. We are establishing terms. He looked at Saul. Position yourself where you can see the office door and the hall. Do not expose yourself. If he appears, you will observe his hands. Saul nodded. Understood. Wolfe looked at Fritz. Fritz, you will remain in the kitchen near the second control switch. If it is triggered, you will announce it loudly. Fritz's face tightened. Yes, sir. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, you will hold the envelope. You will not be heroic. You will not chase anyone. You will do exactly what I tell you, which will be new for you, I said. I'll try it once for science. Wolfe's mouth tightened. For survival. Then he sat back in his chair, settled his hands on the desk, and became what he always becomes when he turns a danger into a problem. Still, listening, intolerant of error. Now, Wolfe said softly. The house is no longer their trap. It is my laboratory. Coyle whispered. And the killer. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. The killer is the specimen. We waited. 10 minutes in a sealed brownstone is a long time. You hear everything. The radiator's little complaint, the distant hush of the street, the faint tick of Wolfe's clock, the shallow breathing of a frightened man who doesn't want to be audible. You also hear the house's new noises, the tiny deliberate clicks of a mechanism that remembers being used. At the 7th minute, a single click sounded from the kitchen direction. Fritz called, loud and controlled. Mr. Wolfe. The pantry latch just moved. Wolfe didn't move. He merely said, good. At the 9th minute, something slid under the office door again. Saul bent, retrieved it, and handed it to Wolfe. Wolfe read it once. Then he looked up at me. Archie, Wolfe said, open the envelope. I stared. You told me. I told you to hold it. Wolfe replied, now you will open it. My fingers felt clumsy as I tore the flap. Inside was Coyle's neat slip with bank and box information, and something else that hadn't been there before. A small brass key, fresh, warm. I looked at Wolfe. That wasn't in here. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. Number Coyle's voice cracked. That's Janie's box key. Silence fell like a weight. Wolfe's voice turned very calm. Then the girl is not merely threatened, Mr. Coyle. She has already been reached. And somewhere in the hall, one lock clicked, slowly, deliberately, like a man closing a door behind him because he knows we are now watching the right room. Chapter 9, if you want to stage a trade in a brownstone that has been turned into a mechanical trap. You don't do it in the office where Wolfe is happiest. You do it where sightlines are long, shadows are obedient, and a man who thinks he owns the house can be taught he doesn't. Wolfe chose the front room. He didn't call it that, of course. He called it the parlor, the way he calls beer, refreshment, and calls Kramer a nuisance. But it was the same room, the one with the heavy furniture that looks as if it has been waiting 100 years for the right conversation. Wolfe sat in his red leather chair with the lamp turned low and the curtains drawn, calm as a judge who has already read the verdict and is only waiting for the guilty to speak. He had positions set. Saul was not visible, which meant Saul was close. He had placed himself where he could see the doorway and the radiator wall without offering his skull as a target. Fritz was in the kitchen near the second control switch, ready to announce any click like a bell ringer at doom. Coyle was in the office with the door shut, because Wolfe did not intend to let a frightened auditor ruin a controlled experiment by collapsing at the wrong moment. That left me on the stage. Wolfe handed me the envelope, resealed, thick enough to look important, and said, Mr. Goodwin, you will hold it in your left hand. You will keep your right hand free. You will not attempt heroism. I'll attempt competence, I said. It's less exhausting. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not be witty. Be precise. I stood near the archway between the hall and the front room, where the light from the lamp made a neat circle on the rug. I could see the front door and the stairs, and, most importantly, the radiator on the side wall where Saul had first found the receiver box. The radiator had always been an innocent part of the room, one of those old iron lumps that keeps you warm while complaining about it. Now it looked like a hiding place with manners. Wolfe's voice was calm. We have offered a trade. He will attempt to take the envelope without presenting proof of life. Watch his hands, Archie. Always, I said. Hands are how people lie when their faces are trained. We waited. In a low-lit room, time stretches. The clock on Wolfe's shelf ticked like it was performing for us. The city outside kept moving. Cars, footsteps, winter wind, yet inside everything was held still by intent. Then the house clicked. Not one lock. Several, in a quick sequence, like teeth. The sound came from the hall and the kitchen, and somewhere deeper, the mechanism making itself heard the way a magician snaps his fingers to draw your eyes. Fritz called from the kitchen, loud and controlled. Mr. Wolfe, the hall bolt just moved. Wolfe did not move. Yes, he said softly. The clicks came again, closer, sharper, like the rig was being pulsed to herd us. They weren't trying to lock us tighter. We were already contained. They were trying to make us look away. And that was when the radiator wall betrayed itself. A thin line of shadow shifted beside the radiator, not the shadow of a man crossing the room, but the shadow of a panel being eased. Just a fraction, just enough for a hand to find purchase. It was subtle, it was clever. It was also wrong, because old plaster doesn't move like that, unless someone has taught it. My eyes went there, the way a dog's eyes go to a stake. The panel slid another inch. Wolfe's eyes stayed on me. He didn't look at the panel. He didn't have to. He had designed the experiment so that I would be the instrument. The locks clicked again, louder, an insistence, a cue. From the panel, a hand emerged. It was bare, pale, steady. It came out low, near the floor, the way you reach for a dropped coin. It moved toward the envelope in my left hand, not rushing, not snatching, confident, as if the sound of the locks had been enough to make me flinch. It wasn't. I stepped half a pace back and brought my right hand down hard on the wrist. The hand jerked in surprise. The panel scraped, a shoulder shifted behind it. Then the man came out. Fast. He didn't crawl like a burglar. He rose like someone who belonged there, who knew the space, who had measured it. He wore a dark coat now, not his earlier respectable suit, and his face was tight with irritation, less like a killer caught and more like a technician whose machine has malfunctioned. He reached again for the envelope. I drove my knee forward into his thigh. He grunted, one ugly sound, and his balance broke. He grabbed at my sleeve, trying to pull me in close, and I smelled him then, cold street damp, and that faint metallic tang of tools. Behind him the locks clicked again, panic this time, not performance. Wolfe's voice cut through the low light, calm as law. "Mr. Rindle, that is enough." The man froze for one fraction, just long enough to confirm what Wolfe had already known. Then Saul moved. Saul didn't leap. He simply appeared from the shadow with a gun in his hand and inevitability in his posture, placing the muzzle where it made argument pointless. "Drop it," Saul said, quiet and final. The man's hands lifted slowly, palms out. His eyes flicked from Saul to Wolfe to me, calculating exit routes that didn't exist. I said, "You should have stayed in the tool bag. It was a better disguise." Wolfe did not smile. He rarely does when he is angry. And he was angry now, the kind of anger that stays civilized and therefore lasts longer. "You will step forward," Wolfe said, "into the light." The man obeyed. He had no choice. In the lamp glow his face looked different than it had in the office, less like a nervous consultant, more like a man who has spent his life telling mechanisms what to do and people to follow. Wolfe's voice was mild. "Caleb Rindle is not your name." The man's jaw tightened. "I'm a locksmith." "You are a mechanic," Wolfe corrected, "and a liar. Caleb Rindle is a borrowed name, and you are wearing it for homicide." The man's eyes narrowed. "You can't prove, I can prove," Wolfe said, "that you installed the remote lockwork. I can prove that you posed this morning as a telephone worker to gain access. I can prove that you inserted yourself here today to monitor the operation and to retrieve what you needed." The man's gaze flicked to the envelope still in my hand. Wolfe noticed, of course. "Yes," Wolfe said softly. "The bank information, the copies, control." The man's lips curled. "You're wrong, I didn't come for copies. I came to keep this from becoming a slaughter." Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. "There is a dead man behind my paneling." The man's face hardened. "He wasn't supposed to die." "Of course," Wolfe said, as if discussing a misplaced spoon. "The death of a courier was inconvenient to your timetable." His eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the front door, as if checking whether someone else might arrive to rescue him. I saw it. Saul saw it. Wolfe certainly saw it. Wolfe leaned forward, a fraction in his chair, the judge about to speak. "You are not the bribery ring," Wolfe said. "You are stealing from it. You trapped us to force a trade, not to erase the evidence. You intended to leave with the envelope, retrieve the copies, and then decide which side to sell them to." The man's nostrils flared. "That's speculation." Wolfe's tone stayed calm. It is deduction. Saul's gun remained steady. Where is the transmitter? The man's jaw worked. I don't have. Saul's eyes didn't change. Don't. The man exhaled. Then nodded toward the hall, in the bag, upstairs. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Goodwin, retrieve it. Gladly, I said, and then looked at Saul. Escort. Saul nodded and moved with me into the hall while keeping his attention on the man in the front room. Fritz appeared at the kitchen entry, face tight, ready to explode into efficiency the moment Wolfe permitted it. We went up and found the leather bag in the guest room, right where a nervous consultant would keep it. Inside, under ordinary tools, was a small transmitter unit, crude but effective, the kind you could trigger with a thumb while smiling politely at your victim. I carried it back down and held it up like a trophy. I didn't want. Wolfe regarded it without satisfaction. There, he said, is your home. A button. The man in the lamplight, our locksmiths, stared at it with a look that was half anger and half grief, the way a man looks at a ruined instrument. Wolfe's voice turned colder. You plan to leave with the evidence. You plan to hurt us with noise and locks. You plan to use the girl as leverage, and you plan to let this house take the blame for your exit. The man's eyes flashed. You don't understand. Wolfe cut him off. I understand perfectly. You made my home into a box with teeth. He paused, then added softly, now I will decide which teeth close first. And as he said it, a distant sound rose from the front stoop, one sharp knock, then another, followed by the faint, unmistakable jingle of a tool bag being set down, as if someone else had arrived for the next act. Chapter 10, the knock on the stoop came again, firm, impatient, and the little jingle of metal that followed told me someone had set a tool bag down like a calling card. Saul's eyes flicked toward the front door. Wolfe didn't turn his head. He had already decided what mattered most, the specimen in his room. Mr. Panzer, Wolfe said mildly, the door. Saul moved to the hall, out of sight, and the house answered him with a small click, one of the rigged bolts yielding as if on command. Saul did not open it yet. He listened, because listening is Saul's way of aiming. Wolfe's gaze stayed on the man we had pulled from the radiator panel. In the lamplight, the face looked tight, controlled, but there was something slightly wrong about the jawline and the hands, something that had struck me earlier and filed itself away. The winter coat had bulked the frame. The cap had hidden hair. The voice had been pitched low. Yet now, with the tension showing, the disguise thinned. Wolfe's voice was flat. Remove your cap. The locksmith hesitated. Saul's quiet voice carried from the hall. Do it. The cap came off. Hair tumbled free, dark, cut short, deliberately plain. The face, in the harsher light, resolved into sharper cheekbones, a narrower chin. The hands were not a large man's hands at all. They were strong, yes, but compact, the kind built for tools and switches. Coyle stared. You're a woman, I supplied. Merry Christmas. Her eyes flashed at me, then at Wolfe. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed, the way a professional looks when a job turns messy. Wolfe's tone remained calm. Your impersonation was competent. Your judgment was not. State your name. She swallowed once. Lena Hark. Wolfe nodded, as if he had expected it. Miss Hark, you posed as a locksmith consultant named Caleb Rindle. You posed earlier as a telephone worker. You installed illegal remote lockwork in my house. You stole Mr. Coyle's envelope of originals. You crushed Mr. Delaney's throat, and you wrote a note threatening a girl. Lena Hark's jaw tightened. I didn't crush his throat to be dramatic, he fought. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Violence is always described by its author as necessity. Coyle's voice shook. Janie, my assistant. Where is she? Hark's gaze slid to him with faint contempt. I live, for now. Saul's voice from the hall was quiet and lethal. Answer him. Hark exhaled, irritated. She's at your office. Watched. I needed her key. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And you have it. You placed it in the envelope to compel us. Hark's mouth twitched. It was proof. You wanted proof. You provided leverage, Wolfe corrected, I said. And the courier. Hark's eyes flicked to me. Delaney was supposed to bring the originals back to the ring. I took them first, he realized. He tried to call someone. He fought. I ended it. Wolfe's voice stayed mild. Then your intent was to steal from the ring. Hark's gaze hardened. The ring was sloppy. Too many hands. Too much fear. I wanted control. Control of the copies, Wolfe said. Hark hesitated, then gave a short laugh. Yes, copies mean options. Options mean money or immunity. Coyle's face crumpled. You were going to kill me. Hark's eyes were flat. You were going to talk. That's what auditors do when they think they're heroes. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. And the girl? Hark's jaw clenched. A lever. I didn't want to use her, but you people don't move unless something screams. You found that my house does not scream. It judges. Saul re-entered the front room, still watching the hall. 2 men outside. Real city workers called about line trouble. Wolfe's mouth tightened. The ring has arrived to retrieve its property. Convenient. Hark's eyes flicked, calculating again. Let me go and you can hand them what they want. Wolfe regarded her as if she were a stain. Number, he leaned forward a fraction. Now we address the final point. He lifted the sheet with the penciled notation, 135 brownstone included in package, and held it where Hark could see it. Mr. Coyle did not write this, Wolfe said. Nor did I. It was written by someone who expected my home to be part of the transaction. Hark's eyes narrowed. That's just planning. It is more than planning, Wolfe replied. It is evidence that the bribery ring intended to use my house as a drop site, a place of reputation, a place where police attention becomes noise. They lured Mr. Coyle here with a promise of protection, because they believed my roof would conceal their exchange. Coyle whispered, They wanted to use you. Wolfe's tone turned icy. Yes, which I find intolerable. He nodded to Saul. Disable the rig. Saul went to the hall and kitchen switch points, and, with Rindle's transmitter already in our possession, began severing what could be severed without setting the house on fire. Fritz assisted, grim and efficient, as if he were removing vermin from a pantry. We heard a series of clicks. Different now, not theatrical. Mechanical surrender, bolts releasing, latches relaxing. The brownstone exhaled, and for the first time since the morning, I heard a sound so sweet it could have been music. The front door's deadbolt turning normally. Inspector Kramer stormed in as if the cold had been insulting him personally, and he intended to arrest it. He had 2 plainclothes men behind him, and the expression of a bulldog arriving late to a bone it had smelled from blocks away. What the hell? Kramer began, then saw Wolfe in the front room, saw Saul's gun, saw Lena Hark standing pale and rigid, and saw me holding a transmitter like a toy I didn't want. His face did what it always does when Wolfe is right. It reddened with rage and gratitude. Wolfe's voice was mild. Good evening, Inspector. You may take her. Kramer moved, cuffing Lena Hark with relish. You, he growled. You're under arrest for... He glanced at Wolfe. For whatever Wolfe says you did. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Murder, extortion, impersonation, unlawful restraint, and the installation of illegal lockwork in a private residence. Kramer blinked. Installation, I said. Don't ask. It's a long story, and you'll hate all of it. Kramer barked at his men to move, then turned back to Wolfe. And the bribery ring? Wolfe's mouth tightened. You will find them on the stoop. 2 men, tool bag. They arrive for their package. They will be disappointed. Kramer stormed out again to collect them like overdue mail. When the noise subsided, Wolfe sat back, restored to his chair as if the world had finally resumed proper posture. Fritz stood in the doorway, face still hard, but relief beginning to show in the careful way he straightened a curtain that had been touched. Saul returned to his usual silence. The case ended for him the moment the danger was contained. Coyle sagged into a chair. My assistant, Janie. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Inspector Kramer will dispatch officers, She will be retrieved. Coyle's voice broke. Thank you. Wolfe's gaze was cool. Do not thank me for what should never have been required. Coyle swallowed. You saved us. Wolfe's mouth tightened. I reclaimed my house, I said, and your peace and quiet. Wolfe glanced at me. Mr. Goodwin, do not be frivolous. This was not the house locking itself. He paused, letting the sentence settle like a verdict. Greed locked this house, Wolfe said, and the killer merely turned the key. He leaned back, eyes half. Lidded again, already retreating toward his orchids and his dinner and the civilized world, he insists on maintaining. Outside. Kramer's voice rose in the hall, barking orders. The brownstone's doors stood open at last, admitting winter air and letting it out again, as if the building were relieved to return to being only a home, no longer a box with teeth, no longer a stage for other men's stories.